Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to the first afternoon of Great Sessions. It's 1:30. It's actually 7:30 for me because I'm from Europe. So normally at this time of the day, I'm actually having wine instead of actually talking to you. So agenda, basically I'm just going to introduce myself, and we're going to go through what is called design surface, which is something that basically lives within Draco. I'll do a bit of demo towards the end, and I'll try to get enough time for you to do any Q&A if you want to. So who am I? So my name is Douglas Wallace. I'm the EMN manager for the platform evangelism team, long title. I actually work for Andy Locates. I've been a FileMaker for 5 years, just about five years in 1 month now. So I got my nice letter from Tim Cook about a month ago, which is kind of nice. And previously, I was working in London for about 15 years in a big data management company where we were basically gathering data for clients like Google, Microsoft, and stuff like that, and using FileMaker. So I've been using FileMaker since just after it was actually moving from Claris to FileMaker. So I've done Claris, FileMaker, Claris, which is kind of cool. So as you've noticed, I've got Scottish names with a French accent, which is kind of weird. But my dad's English and my mum's French. So quite a mixture. In case you're wondering, Douglas Wallace in Scottish means the clear blue water that goes through the Green Valley. Really nice to actually do that if you're trying to get a girl. It actually did work with my wife, so it's kind of nice. So I've been moving around Europe quite a bit. So I know I'm in the US. In terms of geographies, the Americans are not really known to actually know what's around the world. So this is where we are in Kissimmee. Apparently that's the way you pronounce it. Just to give you an idea, this is where the wedge is on the fault line. This is New York. I was born in the Alps near Geneva, so I started skiing when I was about 2.5. Then my dad had enough of the Swiss, so we moved back to London. Stayed there for about 12 years, mostly in the pubs, as my dad used to say. Then I went to Paris for university, so I was going to bars instead of pubs. And then moved back to London, worked there for a couple of years. Met my wife, and then moved to Nantes, which is in Brittany. No one knows where it is, but it's just the nicest place in the world. And then my office is in Paris, so I kind of commute between Paris and Nantes, and London, and the whole of Africa and Asia, because Europe, basically, EMEA is half the world, which is nice. So the one thing is, when I was preparing the session, like a year ago now, there was one thing that basically is every time we actually sort of talk about under the hood session or whatever, there's the one thing is sometimes is because we work in FileMaker and we live FileMaker all the way through, sometimes we forget that we have new users, we have people that have been there for a couple of years and might know everything that the product does and how it works internally. So the one thing is always to remember, even for your client, is never take anything for granted, because we've noticed over the years that sometimes we just basically assume that people are aware of what we do within the product internally. We have like releases of new products, and we just basically think that people just know what it does. So why have another session on design? There's quite a few sessions. Normally, you're not looking to actually FileMaker to do really nice sessions. Ronnie Rios is going to do another one. He's better at design than I am, so it'll be a really cool session. But the principle basically is what I want to go through. So the first is all about perception. Perception in terms of how you actually use the FileMaker app to actually create solutions, and how basically the solution you're going to create for your clients or internally is actually going to work. So there's a law called the Weber Fechner law, basically, that states that the difference between what you actually perceived is proportional to the actual difference. So basically, if you give someone a bottle of water in one hand and then another one, if it's a lot heavier, they're going to notice it quite quickly. But if you do that for a long time, it doesn't make much sense. So the one thing is basically is if you look at this chart, on one side you have like 10 points on in the box. Below you've got 20. So you can really see quite quickly the difference between those two boxes, the amount of dots you have. On the other side, you go from 120 from 110 to 120, and your vision and your eye and your brain basically doesn't pick up the big changes. So it's all about basically the vision in the brain. And we tend to actually and I use it the same as FileMaker developer, is sometimes to go a bit mental on some of the layouts where we start adding objects all around the place, where it gets to the point it gets really confusing for you basically to actually sort of do anything with it, especially if your solution's been living for like 6 years and you need to do, for whatever reason, some big changes, you're completely lost. And so the brain basically, that's what it does most of the time. It's trying to actually sort of process really stuff really quickly, and it's trying to actually scan and find patterns. And if it does that, basically, it's not going to try to actually work the next step of actually noticing the small differences. And you've got other stuff like interpolating and ignoring. And a lot of what we do, and I've noticed that in a lot of solutions, is sometimes we sort of tend to actually forget to actually look at everything because our vision doesn't want to do that. So this is what we call the F pattern. So basically, when you look at websites, when you look at application, and then when you do studies on actually sort of trying to figure out what is the eye looking at, you pretty much get this all the way through. So your vision basically is based on an F pattern. You look sort of top left, then you go right, and then you go down. The next one basically it's a famous sort of, the vision of the red woman basically is the only thing that your vision's picking out. If I ask you basically quite quickly to actually count how many basically other blonde women you can see in the picture, your vision and your brain doesn't want to do it. It's like focusing on one thing. So if it looks nice, then it's fine. If it doesn't look nice, that's where people basically are going to have their vision stuck. The other thing on top of that, so that's for the sort of Cambridge University, is it basically quite easily it says is, if you actually see words and you get the first letter and the last one, your brain can actually read it. So the first couple of words, it's getting hard. By the end of the sentence, your brain basically can read it like it's like normal text. And so it's quite important to actually sort of take into account when you're doing your design of your layouts and the whole system using within FileMaker is never take anything for granted, because for you maybe you'll get used to it after a while, but the user might not actually be getting used to the solution or your layout all the way through. So what is design surface? It's something we brought when we launched FileMaker 12. And every year, we do sort of updates, we actually add stuff. And it does pretty much everything to actually sort of draw what you see on the screen. So it will basically be doing the drawing, any sort of event handling. So when you click into a field or when you click into a button, it's going to do that. The notification, basically, so when you actually enter data, whether if someone basically is in the same field, that's what it's using. The editing tends to do pretty much everything that you actually see on the layout, and it control as well all the layout objects and the views. So it's part of Draco, it's built within it, and its better job basically is to actually view the implementation of a layout. So you create your layout, and design surface is the part of the engine that's going to show you what actually it does. So it does pretty much everything to handle the Windows messaging. It's platform specific, so whether you're Windows and a Mac and iOS, it could handle that, but it does that sometimes in different ways. So for example, basically, if you want to draw a portal, if you need basically draw a portal on one of your layouts, that's where design surface going to call the DB engine to get the data to actually sort of show you the data properly. So it's kind of straightforward. It has a purpose. So it lives within the Draco component. So at the bottom, you've got what we call the support, which is the OS abstraction. So depending on whether we're using stuff for the Mac OS, iOS, or Windows. So Windows is based on something called graphic design interface. For the Mac, it's, I can't remember the name. And for iOS, we use UIKit. And then on top of that, you've got the HBAM layer, which is all about sort of data storage. There's going to be a session tomorrow by Ryan Manook and a couple of the engineers on the whole B-tree system and stuff like that, so you can go and see that one. And on top of that, you've got the database engine that does all the calculation, the queries, the transactions, getting the network sort of latency sort of to work with the rest of the systems. Then you've got the design surface, who's going to do basically the layout, the draw, anything to actually do in terms of the in-progress dialog boxes. And on top of that, you've got the FileMaker engine that does sort of the backend of the script, the layout, the script, and all the user models in the background. So kind of straightforward, nice stuff. Some of the other features that we have in design surface over the years is one of the things, and I've realized that because as Brad was mentioning this morning, we've done this new marketplace. And to do the new marketplace, we did ask a lot of our partners, the FBA, to send us solutions of applications they've actually created to be sold on the market. Part of what we do as the platform evangelism is we do a lot of reviews for new FBAs on the market. And a lot of the stuff that I do in Europe is actually when we have big clients that have issues within FileMaker, we could do reviews sometimes of their solution to actually figure out exactly what doesn't work for them. And I've noticed for a long time, basically, that people basically do not use some of the tools that we have built for you so that you can actually make better layouts. A lot of the time, basically, people just really concentrate on the database queries, the calculation, and then they do layouts, and they just go, yeah, it's just going to work because it's really straightforward. I'm just dragging something, I'm creating a portal, I'm putting buttons. This is just going to work like it's meant to do, and it's not going to do anything. But the issue sometimes is when you have too many objects on your layout, it's going to slow down the systems because the way you've done it might not be the correct way. So we've created all those tools, basically, so the rulers, the guides, the stencil, so that you can actually have a good idea of how it's going to look eventually on the device, the explicit layout edge that's on the side, the selection of objects, the states, the layout object window we created, the themes and stuff like that. So it's all part, basically, of the design surface. So what is in a layout? So the layout is always a 2D canvas. It has a list of parts within your layout. It has a list of all the objects that you can find that layout. It has the alias of the table that you're using, the base table. And on top of that, we apply a theme and styles. So in the parts, you've got a couple options that you can actually set up. It's called, you've got the type, the position, the size, and sometimes you have a field. For the layout objects, there's a few information you have to provide, or the system actually requires, so position, size, the parent window, sometimes the field, it can have a style or not, and it could have calculations. And then within for every layer object, then you have the views. So basically, when you create, let's say, a button, or you create objects within a portal, the view basically is going to represent that. So in terms of the composition of a layer object, and that's the one thing that basically, so some of you have been there a couple of, I think 4 or 5 years ago, there was a session that was done by Andrew Paulson, who was basically sort of explaining basically how objects are being sort of loaded into the memory and being drawn. I've noticed that even talking sort of to partners across Europe, that a lot of people basically weren't really aware that was happening in the background. So if you have an object, like a text field, basically it's if you can say the image basically of the text field in the background is actually split into what we call the night part image. On the other side, there's some other objects like the tab controls, the slice controls, and the popovers. They're actually split into 3-part images. So what it means basically is if you have a field that's really long, instead of actually loading the massive fields, because we know the position of all the different sort of areas on quarter, it's a lot easier for us to actually cut that into 9 parts and be able to actually load that really quickly. Same for basically when you have a popover, we basically take the left-hand side, like 1 pixel long basically, so we have the top bit and the bottom bit with the arrow. We take a slice of the center bit and then the far end. And then after that, because within the representation of the XML basically background, we can actually show that on the screen quite easily. And then moving on to themes and styles, the one thing I've noticed sometimes is not a lot of people basically use grids or modules, especially sort of first-time users. They tend to actually sort of pick randomly a field they will put on the layout and then see what it can do with it, and then maybe sometimes move too many objects on one layout, and that's where eventually they have issues getting nice design. So this is basically something I picked up quite easily on the internet. I've noticed basically, even though this FileMaker Go, we haven't really got that much basically sort of users doing apps for FileMaker Go. They might do a few for iPad if they have clients, but I've noticed sort of that much users doing application for iPhones. And even though it's a massive market, because if you look at the numbers of actually iPhones being sold around the world, it would be something where you would actually imagine it's a good market for you to actually get into that. So within this grid, basically, it's a nice way to be able to actually say, okay, I'm going to basically have margins. I've noticed, sadly, and especially in some of the reviews that I've done recently, that there's very few margin being put in some layouts. And so you can see clearly that sometimes objects are not really placed properly. And because I was saying before, in terms of the perception, people will actually notice that really quickly. And that's where they start complaining, saying, well, actually, I'm not using that layout because I don't like the way the fields actually work. It's because the perception that they have is it doesn't work for their eyesight, and the vision is just saying to them there's something wrong with it, and they can't actually use properly. So I'm just going to show you some stuff in Pro Advanced just to sort of give you an idea. Some of you, I'm sure, actually know that, but it's always nice to actually have a refresh course to sort of make sure, if you're not using it, to do it now. As always, basically, if you're looking for design resources, the tool is the best one is the Apple human interface guidelines. They give you a huge amount of information, especially if you want to start sort of doing really sort of nice apps, whether it's for the iOS platform, whether it's iPad, whether it's iPhone, it's actually good for that. So let me just find my mouse. Where's it gone? So just before I sort of go, so basically this is a sort of basic layout. There's just one object in the middle. If I go into the layout mode, I've basically sort of used the guides to be able to actually sort of really sort of show me exactly the vision of how it's going to work for the not-by-image splitting. So I assume everyone in the room knows about the guides. Show of hand, who doesn't use guides? Just the one? Everyone uses the guides? Wow. That's impressive. I wasn't expecting that. So as you can see, basically, for those, I think 2 of you who actually don't know, you basically just click on the ruler on the side, and then you can actually drag your guides. It's quite easy to do, but it's really nice because that way, when you're doing your layout and you explain to whether it's for your in-house development or for your customers, you can actually show them the layout and actually try to actually get them to understand how it really works in the background, because they normally just see the end product. If you show them basically the way that stuff is being done internally, they'll actually trust you a lot more. If you basically can actually explain to a client exactly every step of the way, whether it's through the scripts or even through the layout, they're going to basically trust you a lot more and be more confident in actually using the product. So the one thing is, for those not using it, you've got to make sure that your ruler is on, and then you're showing on the side the guides and the grids. I'm just going to close that. So I'm just going to use, I've got a small spreadsheet that we use for demos. It's got a bit of contact. So for those who are, is everyone using FileMaker Pro Advanced 18? Show of hand who's not using it. So you can raise your hands. I've got lights in my face. I can't see any of you. So it doesn't make that much difference. So that's the new, for those who haven't seen it, or maybe you haven't sort of seen the session, that's the new interface sort of system we create, a dialog box, to be able to actually import data into FileMaker, to just make it a lot easier for everyone to be able to use it. Let me get to the data one. So what I'm going to do basically is I want to do a new layout for an iPhone 10 or 10s, or whatever they call it every week when they change name. So you can see, you've got the stencil, which is basically the orange rectangle that basically will actually give you the layout, what's going to be represented on the layout and what the user is going to see. There was one change that we did back in FileMaker 18, which we didn't actually sort of talk too much about it, and I was told quite late, is anything that's in the gray area, all the objects weren't really calculated all the time. But because the way we've actually changed the way the cache works between the server and the client, there's a lot more information now being sent from the server to the client to be able to present that. So we send basically all the tables, table aliases, the field names, the scripts, all that information. And then everything in that layout, even though it might be in the gray area, is going to be sent as well. So if you have like calculation or you're storing sort of information on the gray side, it's going to be sent and it's going to be processed as well. It's not going to be drawn, but it's going to be processed in terms of if there's any calculations. So if I go back and basically have my layout, I'm just basically, with this, I'm going to be able to actually create the perfect format so that whenever information I put into my layout for my FN10, it's going to look nice. So what I've got to do basically is I'm just create a new custom size. So the way you have to do it, and the size-wise, is you'll be able to actually see it from here. So the screen size of a iPhone 10 is in points. So even though they talk a lot about pixel at Apple, but it's multiplied by 3. In terms of points, the screen height, total size that you have is 812. You've got the status bar at the top, which you can't do anything with. That's where basically lives the clock and then the network information. Then at the top, normally, when you do an app for an iOS device, you have a navigation bar. It can be up to 97 points. And then you have all the information you can put at the bottom, and then you have the tab bar, which is normally about 45 points. And then you have the bottom, the home indicator. So within this, basically, is I'm going to replicate that in FileMaker in a nice way. So I'm just going to get rid of the notification at the bottom. We apply my custom width, make it that size, and then move that to 734. And the next bit, basically, I am going to create my margin on the side. So I've got my rulers. I do the first one at 16 points. And the second one, I always fail to remember the value of it, is 358. So why am I actually doing this? So the thing is, like perception, every user who has an iPhone, when they have an app, whether it's they use the contact, whether you use something, the margin that you have here is exactly the same margin and pretty much on every application you'll see on an iPhone. So if you decide for whatever reason not to apply basically the guidelines that actually Apple put together, it's going to get harder for you to actually get your user to actually be able and want to actually use the app. Because all they're going to say is, it actually looks different than the other apps that I use every day. So they're just going to go, actually, it doesn't work for me, because it's not what I'm expecting to do. And as we are just basically spending our whole life, whether it's Android device or iPhones, we're so used to the same stuff that if it's different, we don't want to use it. Sadly, our generation is getting lazier and lazier, and so it's one of the things to actually be careful about. So I've got my margin on the top. I'm just going to basically drag out to get my margin at the top. And then I'm just going to basically put a bottom bar with the 5 tab that actually recommended by Apple with a weight height of 49 and 374. And put that at the bottom. Just put one logo at the bottom and put that at 16. And so it's quite straightforward. You've got your basic stuff, but the idea is basically is you've really done really quickly. You can actually do your basic grid that you're going to use for everything you want to do for the iPhone, and that way, if you replicate that all the way through, you make sure your system works properly. So what I'm going to do basically is I'm going to do, let's use that. I'm going to do basically a portal for my contacts. I will do 10 for the time being. move that on the side and just have like the company name. And then make sure my company goes across the board using the guidelines. And then at the end, use the nice Apple font. And the size will be 17. Now, if I click on this, and I've noticed that so many people do use that, if you change basically the style of an object, you get the red arrow. Who basically thinks that in the solutions, everything is saved properly into the theme? Is everyone sure that 100% of the time they've actually stuffed everything in a theme? I'm pretty much you'll say yes, but if you look at your solution, you're going to find so many objects that have that red arrow. When you look at it, it's like, yeah, it doesn't really make that much difference. The problem is when you're actually loading data from the server to your client, if anything that's not saved in a theme properly will basically come as local. So when you're getting the data from the server, it's going to basically get all the CSS code for that theme, and then anything that is not saved or kept locally is going to basically be rewritten separately towards the end of the file. So afterwards, I'll show you the file. Well, actually, I'll do it now. So it's not saved. If I use the new tool, which is called Save as a Copy as XML, you can basically much see the whole structure of your file. So it's all nicely written. It's the, so that's the XML that comes out. When we brought, was it on 17, we brought the new default fields, which is basically the same as an XML file in the background that gets open and basically loads all the information. And the new add-ons that we have, all the basics, starter solution, is the same. They use an XML file to actually create the layout from nothing and based on the information such as this. And so within this, you can pretty much see, so at first you've got all the table counters, and it's a file that actually is quite long. So currently that file has got 6,000 lines of code. And I've pretty much got nothing in my layout. I've just got one layout. I've got one object, or two objects. That's pretty much it. So if you go down the list, you basically get to this point where it's going to load the CSS for the theme that I'm using, which is minimalist, which actually is a theme that hasn't got that much information. And then I go down, 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 down. Actually, I've got two themes because I actually didn't save my file properly. So this is all the information that gets loaded, which is quite long, because that's all the CSS. And then once that's all done, I'll get to the next one. And then I've got another theme as well, which is called minimalist, which I'm loading as well. So I'm actually loading two themes, even though I'm actually using just the one. And then the list is really, 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 really long. And you go down, 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 and then oops, and you get to this point. And then eventually you'll see within your layout catalogs for some objects where we're actually loading local CSS. So we get the data, we load that, and then on top of that, we send extra information. So once you have a layout that or a solution like mine has got like two layouts, hasn't got that much information in terms of objects. Imagine if you have like 250 layouts, and you have, I don't know, 70 objects on a layout, and then you have your customer who has a server based out of some office with bad internet, and they want to use an iPad, and it takes them 25 minutes to load information. They're just going, FileMaker is not good for that. Actually, FileMaker is not really the issue. The issue is the fact that basically there's too much data going through. So why am I basically going on about this is with the future of FileMaker, we're doing more stuff on the cloud. We've got FileMaker Cloud for AWS, where we have sort of data storage, which are really nice. But if you basically have too much sort of overhead on top of it, your solution are going to be really slow. And as Brad was saying this morning, and then as you'll see tomorrow with the keynote from Srini, we have a vision to actually move really quickly to be able to actually offer what people on the market actually have seen from everyone else. Most companies, like if you have clients using Salesforce, everything is web-based, it's on the cloud. They don't really care where actually it's based, it's on the cloud. But the way that Salesforce has done it is to be able to actually sort of control the way you do your like the views of your screens, so that you can't actually have too many problems like that. And the idea is to really sort of push that. So with some of the stuff that we've brought in latest versions, where we do a lot more usage of XML to actually do layouts and stuff like that, in the future, we'll be using that even more to be able to actually transfer. So if you have huge layout systems for your clients or for yourself, start sort of cleaning up at least the themes and the styles so that it loads a lot quicker. When I was doing the review, there was this company based in Ireland. They make a great solutions for vets, but it's just massive. He's got 375 layouts, plus the dev layouts that he keeps inside. That's an extra 50. He's got 85 tables. It's massive. And I was like, to get a review, you have to actually put this file on your FileMaker server so that I can connect to it. And he was like, it's going to be too slow. I was like, well, just give it a try. So loading is kind of fine because the first screen is not a lot, and then I go into layout mode and to be able to view all the layout that he has, and it takes 10 minutes, and I get bored, but I just wait. So I go in the layout, and it's kind of straightforward, and then I go into where maybe sometimes people never go, is I go into the theme menu, and he's got 49 themes. And you go, okay, but your solution's been there for a long time. He goes, yeah, I've been doing this for about 20 years. Okay. And so the first theme that he's got, the name, sadly, he's got Classic. And he's using Classic on 3/4 of the layouts. And I go, I don't know if you read the guidelines, but anything with Classic doesn't work. Because Classic, sadly, was a theme that we basically put in 18, but since then, and we've told you, and if you don't know it, don't use Classic. Because it has to use the CSS, which doesn't work with the new or the newer sort of version that we have FileMaker, and gets really badly translated into XML when you want to do. And then he had about 20, I think, layouts that were never used. And like, just delete them. Like, I might use them sometimes. I'm like, okay, when? I don't know, sometime. Okay. You can actually create a new file separately, import your theme for that file, and then delete them, and then you've got it. Oh, yeah, I could do that. Okay. And like, you have to do it, because otherwise your solution is not accepted. And so we cleaned that up. And then I said exactly the same as go back into your layout, and I just clear that. Go back into your layout and start looking into your styles and stuff like that. And pretty much everything had red arrows everywhere. It's just, but it was basically, and I assume a lot of you actually in the same position is, you do your stuff, your layout looks good, and you think, yeah, it's fine, I'll just do it. But the problem, basically, he was not looking to actually have because he really sort of didn't know exactly what CSS was all about and stuff like that, he didn't know that basically he should be creating more styles and even more sort of type of objects. So basically, for a text field, even though he was actually using 4 different type of fonts, different sizes, in terms of the name, he was still using the same one, just the basics text one that you actually get from the Classic. So he had to actually do a lot of cleaning up to get to something that was really nice. But suddenly, basically, solution loads a lot quicker. And it was hard for him to actually sort of talk to customer and start selling the whole vision of actually having in the office on your MacBook your solution, and then when you go to see a farmer with your app, having the same stuff on the iPad, because he had tried, and all he had to do was actually have a copy of the solution on the iPad, try to do some synchronization, but in Ireland, they barely have the internet, and if they do, it's really, really slow. So I said, well, if you start cleaning it up, it's going to be a lot easier for you to actually move that forward. And then so we played with it and eventually went, well, actually, in terms of hosting, it's a bit of a bore because normally what I do is I tend to actually sort of host that to my house. I've got really good internet for Ireland, which is basically a megasecond or megabyte per second. And then some of my clients connect to that. So I said, move to the cloud, because actually you've got the data center from Amazon in Ireland, in Cork, next to where you are. And then suddenly you'll be able to actually sort of showcase that to your clients and get to your clients, actually now, you can have your stuff in your office and you can actually work on the field with your iPad, and the stuff that you've been dreaming out for the last 20 years actually is coming to you. So this is what he's done. And he's actually now starting to actually move some of these first clients to the cloud with an iPad solution. Good thing for him is he can basically put the price up. So he's making more profit, he can invest more into more training, he can potentially actually have another developer actually working with him because he just works with his wife. So after 20 years, I think they're probably going to kill themselves. But it's something that basically a lot of time we actually do see that. And so if I go back to the XML, as you can see, it just goes on and on and on and on. So when I did manage to actually log into the system and I did a save as a copy in XML, it was a 35 megabyte file. So there's a lot of stuff in that. This one, which is kind of small, is, I think it's about 720K, so it's not that lot. If I open one of our starter solution, which even though they are they're good, some of them are basically a bit outdated. So if I take one of the, let me take one that's got a lot of layouts, the project one. So we've got quite a few layouts in that format. We've got like we've got it for desktop, and we've got an iPhone version, and then there's a bit of a version for the web. So if I use the tool, save a copy as XML, export that. So I've already got like 9 megabytes, and there's no information, there's no data. It's just a few layouts. If I look into the database, I haven't got much. Couple of tables, not that many fields. So it's kind of a straightforward, and it's already 9 megabytes. So you can imagine basically every time the work that has to be done. If I go into that, even though the app is done internally, if I do a search for local CSS, and I'm sorry for the guy who's done that at FileMaker, but there's a huge bunch basically of stuff. So even us internally, whether we're actually promoting it, we forget about doing it. And I bet if you go back to your hotel rooms or whatever, or at the bar, and you do the same exercise, you're going to go, oops, there's a bit of work for me to do today. And there will be, because it's a bit of a pain. I mean, I've had to do it internally when we do sort of apps, when I do apps for the internal market in Europe. And I'm just, most of the time, actually a lazy guy. I just don't really care about this until I've got basically people from German office complaining that it's really, really slow. Or someone in Spain wants to use that on the iPad, and they're saying it's slow to load up, and it's when I move from layout to layout, it just takes too much time. If you start cleaning it up, and suddenly, bang, it just works. And the thing is more, people are actually so used to actually not have that problem on the internet, because normally when you put a website, you have a CSS, you just use it, you create the CSS before you actually start doing your layouts on the web or even creating sort of the API calls. So you haven't got the problem of actually loading too much information. So from day one, it's actually done quite straightforward, and it's always quite nice. The other thing I was going to show quickly before is, I've got no internet, is, so on the Apple website, they have some really nice information in terms of Keynote. So that one is the Apple design resources for iOS. If you're planning to do, or if you haven't done them yet, or if you're planning to do a custom solution for iPads or iPhone, use that. Because it will give you basically all the stuff that actually is the way that Apple sort of view and know how their users will actually view the information. So you can set up your own color scheme, but for some of the buttons, especially sort of if you had like a white layout and your company or your clients have not really a charter in terms of colors, you can actually use that, and you're quite safe into actually making it look nice the whole way through. So it just shows you some of the stuff you can do, but if I go down to the tabs, you can actually see quite easily what I have to do. If you look at it on Keynote, you'll be able to actually get the size of every of the object on that layout. And all you have to do is pretty much copy and paste in FileMaker, and you have the same values. So when you're doing your solution, you're basically doing it the way that people expect it to look from day one. And then it just goes you into Power and View, and then you can start using the naming convention from within Apple. So it's a lot easier to actually process that the way through. So it's quite a useful template. So you can do the dark mode and the light mode. I'm not sure most people actually, if to do iOS app, if you're looking to do a dark mode within FileMaker, but it's a bit of a pain. So if you're looking to actually sort of, especially when iOS 13 comes out in, I don't know when, because Apple doesn't tell me anything, you're going to have people basically asking about it. Because if they turn on sort of dark mode on their system and they think, oh, it's going to do the same on my custom app, and it doesn't do it, you just go, that's kind of weird. Can I have dark mode? And then you go, yes, it will be $50,000, please. Because you're going to spend a huge amount of time. So if from day one, basically, you start sort of creating your theme, which you've got your light theme, and then you can do whether you want to do calculation or conditional stuff, it's going to be a lot easier to actually promote that. So it goes through the whole stuff. And then you've got all your different UI elements. And if you start using this system, well, first of all, you don't actually have to recreate anything. It's already done for you the nice way. It's done by teams of about 2,000 employees at Apple. You've got pretty much everything in there. You've got psychoanalysis. You've got a whole bunch of medical profession actually working into that environment with designers. So just use that. It'll just make your life a lot easier. And then you've got all the different sort of tab bars, the toolbars, and pretty much everything you can do. And then all the controls that you have. So if you use that and you limit yourself to that, and you find the small sort of ways of actually doing that, like the switches or the page control in FileMaker, which I'm assuming pretty much on the internet you can actually find that information quite easily. Use that. It just makes so much more. It's going to be so much better in terms of for you and your client. And then you've got all the light controls, and then how it looks, and then everything back into dark mode. And then all the different views that can be built up on top of that. So it's kind of a nice little sort of version. Go back into that one. So it's a bit earlier, but I was going to do Q&A because I was expecting no one to actually be using the tools that we have. So the session, I said will because we can't, it's either will or have not. You can't do both. So it's not going to have updates, but it might if I get told to. Cool. So if you want to do, we can do quick Q&A now for the next 10 minutes. So the mic is, I can't see anything, sorry, it's at the front. If anyone's got any questions or just think that I'm talking nonsense.
For you?
Yeah.
Speaking toward the usage of guides, currently we have two options for guides. We can save them to one layout, or we can share them with all layouts. In any solution of significant size, we often have to design screens with different geometries, form views, list views, card windows, etc. It would be really awesome if we could save sets of guides that we could then apply at will to specific layouts.
Yeah. So it's been looked at because some of the stuff. So tomorrow, I think in the visionary keynote, we'll show you some of the feature where we're going and some of the stuff we're actually doing with XML, and it will give you a vision of where we want to go and stuff that we want to do with that. So you'll have that quite soon.
All right. Thanks.
Whenever you copy the XML off of a layout, local CSS is also used for as a tag on conditional formatting. Do you know if it's the same with the save as XML?
Yes, it will basically put that in the file. So it's the whole representation of the whole layout.
Right. So you can't really use that same method of finding local CSS with that because it's also going to, any conditional formatting will show up as local CSS as well.
It will, but it will just be the conditional formatting
itself, right?
Itself, not the whole style that basically is applied to that. So we'll just save. So you'll still have a local CSS. So the only way not to get any local CSS is just to use the FileMaker themes.
Right.
As soon as you modify it, you'll have a bit of it, but it will be quite light. So you should be able to pick it up really nicely, versus having like the whole lot being sort of reloaded from scratch every time.
Right. All right. Thank you.
So as I think you've noticed, a lot of people still have classic layouts because they've put in all this work over the years, and it's been a big chore to try to convert them, and even FileMaker's internal files have some of these local CSS. Have you thought about creating more tools to make it easier to convert those old objects into modern themes?
So I've asked quite a few times, and I think Ron is the same. We've asked basically a way to be able to actually get rid of the classic theme because we have to support FileMaker 12 from sort of when it was created. I think part of the code fact that we can't actually get completely rid of classic, which is a bit of a shame. So normally what I advise is if you start it's a bit of work at first, but basically for every layout that you have when you're using the classing, start sort of changing one of the style and then renaming basically the theme to something else different from classic and apply that across all your layout. And that way you won't be actually, so the theme, the CSS will actually get loaded because it's still saved within the file, but it's not going to be actually get used by any of the views. So it's loaded in memory, but actually design surface don't actually load it and doesn't use it at any one time, so you'll be safe. But you can't, the problem is if it's an old file and it has classic, you can't actually get completely rid of it. And so I've been asking internally whether we can actually have it, and they're saying, we are trying. So I'm hoping it's going to come soon.
Or I'm just thinking of tools like to take an old style button that's a grouped object. Why can't that just be turned into a real button?
Oh, like doing it that way?
Just taking objects and turning them to real objects. Thank you.
Yeah. Please. Yeah, the price of FileMaker will go up quite a bit if we do that. And a couple of $1 million after the year.
Hello.
Hi.
I noticed you made your font text Apple's system font, SF Pro Display.
Yeah.
Is that shipping with Go now?
No, you still have to...
You still have to load a profile?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was that.
And the other thing, so I don't know if I didn't actually get the internet. So there's Apple is actually releasing a new app called SF Symbol, which is basically all the San Francisco font icons that you can actually use within the iOS. And then they've done the app so that you can actually export all of those sort of icons that you see in the iOS app into SVG and actually import them back into FileMaker. So it's on a beta release for the time being. So if you go to the, let's go back one. It's dead. If you go back, so if you go into the design resources, you'll be able to actually get the file. It's the first version, so not every time you can export the icons into SVG, sorry, but they're actually making the effort so that everyone can actually use them pretty much everywhere. Monsieur Normand, tu veux parler en français? On peut le faire en français si vous voulez. I should have done the session in French.
The question is, there are a number of things. I mean, you've been surprised how few people were using guides. And I think one of the reasons is that if you want to share those guides across layouts and the file is already uploaded on the server, it's basically you lose all your pre-existing guides.
Yeah.
And there are many things that are saved, let's say, as global fields in this kind of session variables that are lost when you upload the file to the server, such as the guides or the metric units and so on. Is it planned to fix this so it's saved at the file level instead of the session level?
Yeah, so the plan is basically to make it, how can I say stuff without saying stuff? Without getting fired, mostly. The way we're working is to say if we work basically on a hosted environment in pretty much everything we do in FileMaker, is there a point to actually create the file locally? You want to actually have the file already basically being hosted.
Exactly.
From the start.
The problem is that, for instance, guides, if you have a file hosted and you start creating guides, and then the moment you share them across layouts, you just lose them when you close the session,
Yeah.
which is kind of not expected behavior, I guess.
Yeah. So it's something we're working on.
Yeah. Take your time.
I don't know whether they're going to show stuff tomorrow, but yeah, it's something we're working on. Because the idea is, as you'll see tomorrow, a lot of stuff is more about sort of from day one, making sure people actually share the information. So it's sort of hosted from the top without actually sort of saying, I'll just work locally and then upload it and then lose some of the stuff.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, hi.
So you mentioned that there was a change where you have, like, if you have a field in the gray area, that it now loads the data from the server?
Yeah. It's not going to do the draw,
Right.
but it will actually load some of the data. Yeah.
Got it. The way I understand it, if fields or data are inside a tab or a popover, it doesn't load until those are called,
Yeah.
right? Has any of that changed?
No, that hasn't changed.
Okay, good.
So you're safe on that, yeah.
Awesome.
So I actually learned, because the thing is, so I think we did a change in 16, and we didn't actually mention it that much. And we had a couple of clients where they moved from 16 to 17, where solutions sort of opening up took like a couple of seconds, went to like 4 or 5 minutes. I think you had the issue, Fabrice, as well. And then we figured out basically it's loading a lot more data, and that's where it's getting. So if you have like issues sometimes where before you didn't have like fine in progress, and you have it coming up,
Yep.
and you can't figure out why, it's because it's loading all the stuff in the gray area.
Got it.
And then because we sometimes overuse the gray area, where some people sometimes will just whack in the whole thing, if it gets loaded, it's like really, really slow.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. I got one more question. No? Fabrice.
I know I have to fill up your time, so
Thanks.
the current theme
Yeah.
are just about, like, say, visible attributes that are very common in CSS, such as colors,
Yeah.
fonts, and so on. In the frame of a database implication, we also have the data formatting. So, for instance, it's all what's found on the fourth tabs of the
Yeah.
inspector, which is data formatting, like currency, all
Yeah.
that stuff, and also the behaviors, like do you go to the next field when you type enter, and so on. In practice, in real life, it makes it very difficult to use properly the themes, because these attributes do not belong to the theme, which makes sense in CSS, but in our particular use of
Of the
themes,
system, yeah, it should be in there.
it should be in there. I mean,
Yeah.
otherwise, the only way to work efficiently with themes is to have a huge object library, which kind of let's say, for instance, an amount field, which should be, accessible in browse mode and in a portal.
Yeah.
Have a look, which is different than let's say,
Yeah. So some of the stuff that actually we're putting in the XML, so in the background, so when you do a 7 XML, when you look at the objects, all that information is stored as XML, and then we separate that basically from the CSS. Because the thing is, so currently the idea is to be able to actually use your layout in WebDirect, and so because we have to translate that, anything that basically doesn't really work properly, as you're saying, in CSS, can't be loaded, so that's why we have to actually have it separately.
Yes, but how is XML going to help us, create a new object right from the team with already all the attributes that are expected, such as, well, an amount has the currency sign and is 2 decimals and is aligned and right aligns.
Yeah. So once because I think so, we're working on a couple of iterations of that XML representation. Once we've got it to a point where we can create a guide to explain to you how everything's created, you'll be able to actually sort of, from the back, insert like all the things you want to do directly with the new XML code.
Okay, expecting. Thank you.
Great presentation, thanks.
Thanks.
In the olden days in FileMaker, when you did a DDR, you had an encoded graphic. You actually encoded the graphics, which was a lifesaver in some instances.
Yeah.
We could grab that encoded graphic and expand it. Will the save as XML encode graphics in the future so that we can expand them and use them?
For that version, I'm not sure it has it, because it's V1. But for the future, I think, yeah, they're looking into doing a lot more stuff, having more data, sort of raw data from your tables into that XML.
And the extension of that question is the difference between old men and young men is old men fantasize and young men daydream, but fantasizing about DDRs or the future DDR, being able to recreate the whole file from a DDR so that we could go from test or from dev to test to production without moving the file itself.
So like everything is, I can't mention anything about the future.
Okay. Well, then I'll
But you're getting it, so
yeah. Okay.
you're on the right track.
Thanks.
Hi, Douglas.
Yeah, you can raise the mic, I think. No.
I'll just do it like this. A quick question about styles, theming and styles. The problem we have is when we make a new style, so we duplicate or start from the default.
Yeah.
So we make a copy or we make a new style based on the default. If you make a change to the default style, it will be replicated in the second one.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you make a new style from the second one,
Yeah.
the link is broken. So if you then make a change to the default style, let's say you change the font, it's applied to the second one, but not to the third one. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yeah, there's no cascading effect from the...
So so the thing is you always have to start from the default, and then you can only go one step further. So you can't go two. And that's really annoying because you always have to start from
Are you blaming me for this?
Yeah. No.
What?
Just wondering if there's a fix or you're aware. I suppose we have...
Yeah, so I know because I think it's a recurring sort of theme. So I did see, I mean, there's a couple of guys. Normally is you can actually create, so before you actually start doing the layouts with all the data, you could actually create a layout with every type of, with all the objects. And then so that way you can actually, so you're basically creating your graphic chart in one layout where you have all your layout objects. You decide basically the fonts you want to use. And once you've done that and you've saved everything, then you use those the way forward.
Yeah, but in practice it's
really
not manageable because, okay, you make a copy of the default one, let's say left aligned, and then you need just the same but aligned to the right, let's say. You can't use this one to make the new one. You have to start from the default one, and then so okay, but no quick fix on that one.
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
Because I think it would mean, so it will be really hard because most people already are not using themes and style properly. So if we add an extra layer, no one's going to use it.
No, just the link between the default one and the third one should be.
Yeah, but then you have to create to create a cascading effect. So
yeah, that's what's cascading.
Yeah, but it will mean basically having like.
That's how it should work.
Yeah,
cascading. No.
Is that for me? Thank you.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Cool. Anyone else? Got 20 seconds to go. Not even that. Cool. Thank you very much.